Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 131. Erosion. Part 1. The society leader's second disciple just left? Yes. At Seokyoung's report, the Shadow Clan master tapped the desk in his office with his finger. It seemed the result at the Corpse Blood Valley gates had spread faster than expected. Already, the second disciple Jang Nunye had made a move. It seems young master Jang Nunye was trying to use that child Mok Jaeyoung as a foothold. He had already approached several times, requesting support, but each time, the Shadow Clan master had refused, saying the clan master was still in good health and he had no intention of supporting anyone. However, now that he had a formal disciple, Jang Nunye was blatantly targeting him. But unexpectedly, he refused young master Jang Nunye's offer. What was surprising was that Mok Jaeyoung had refused young master Jang Nunye's offer without any hesitation. And yet nothing particular had happened, which was astonishing. The second disciple was someone who had to get what he wanted to be satisfied. It was strange that such a person would return without any complaints after Mok Jaeyoung's single refusal. Was there nothing else out of the ordinary? At the Shadow Clan master's question, Seokyoung hesitated for a moment. In his heart, he wanted to tell everything, but the fear that had pierced his chest made it impossible for him to reveal what had happened earlier. He is concealing his martial prowess. He possesses a strange ability. He had some inaudible conversation with the second disciple. There was so much he wanted to say. However, his lips wouldn't part. Even though the Shadow Clan master's room was soundproofed, he had the illusion that Mok Jaeyoung was watching, making it impossible for him to say this. Nothing else happened. At his answer, the Shadow Clan master's eyes slightly narrowed. However, without revealing it, he said, "That's fortunate. Then you may go." "Yes." Tap. Escort Seokyoung clasped his hands in greeting and left the office. As he left, a voice came from somewhere. "Clan master." "Yes. It feels like something is missing from the report." "I agree with that statement." Unlike usual, Seokyoung's complexion was pale, and for some reason, he seemed to have not fully conveyed the circumstances of what had happened outside the estate. Considering the second disciple Jang Nunye's temperament, nominally, he was the leader of the Shadow Clan, commanding the information, secrets, and spies of the Heaven and Earth Society. There was no way he wouldn't find this strange. Assign someone to Seokyoung. Yes. And inform those stationed at the separate residence to write down and report his every move. Yes. Tap. With a small sound from the ceiling, the presence disappeared. After he left, the Shadow Clan master unrolled an old scroll placed on the desk in his office. The scroll was written in characters completely different from Hanzi. Ari. It was difficult to even consider it a secret code. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. And so, 7 days passed. Over those 7 days, the Shadow Clan master fell into various concerns. They were concerns that arose from observing Mok Jaeyoung, who had become a formal disciple over those 7 days. The first was Mok Jaeyoung's talent. It was something he experienced starting the very next day. He had given him a secret manual to memorize and called him to the clan master's private training room to teach him the ghost shadow footwork. So, before teaching him, he told him to demonstrate the stances to the extent he understood if he had memorized the secret manual. However, just what is this? The Shadow Clan master couldn't hide his surprise. That's because Mok Jaeyoung had digested the ghost shadow footwork too perfectly. Not a single stance was out of place, and it was accurate as if he had trained and mastered it for a long time. He wondered if Mok Jaeyoung had perhaps practiced the ghost shadow footwork overnight. But that wasn't the case either. Young Master Mok just stayed locked in his room quietly. According to the reports from the escort warriors and attendants monitoring the separate residence, he had done nothing. It seemed he had really just rested last night after having a meal. The Shadow Clan master couldn't hide his amazement at the fact that he had perfectly grasped the footwork in a single day without doing anything. Is he truly a genius? He was aware that Mok Jayangan possessed innate martial talent. Hadn't he shown the amazing ability to instantly imitate the right fist, left palm technique's marvelous principle right in front of him? So, the Shadow Clan master tested Mok Jayangan. This time, he gave him the Flying Phantom Saber art and told him he would give him an hour to memorize or learn as much as he could. An hour later, the Shadow Clan master asked Mok Jayangan, "How much have you learned?" The Flying Phantom Saber art was the Shadow Clan master's unique martial art and belonged to the Demonic Ascension martial arts. He took pride in it being one of the top 10 saber arts in the entire martial world. So, it was somewhat more difficult to learn than the Ghost Shadow footwork, and he thought it would be impossible to master in a short time. However, just what am I seeing? What was happening? Mok Jayangan demonstrated the Flying Phantom Saber art too skillfully. He even displayed the later stances that couldn't be performed without grasping the saber intent, not inferior to the Shadow Clan master himself. Seeing this, the Shadow Clan master was genuinely shocked. How was this possible in just an hour? It's absurd. Beyond shock, he even felt fear at Mok Jayangan's martial talent to the point of being terrified. From the beginning, Mok Jayangan didn't need something called teaching. When learning stances for the first time, the master had to correct the accurate posture and the meaning behind the stances, but he comprehended it all on his own just by looking at the secret manual. Just in case, he could confirm it by teaching him 2 more martial arts. One hears and knows 10, no, one martial art and knows 10. There was nothing much to teach. In just a single day, he had comprehended all the main martial arts of the clan. Since he had awakened to all the stances on his own, the key was nothing but reaching a higher realm through cultivation methods or enlightenment. I'll have to change the teaching method. So, the Shadow Clan master changed the method to a question and answer format rather than teaching martial arts. Even if it wasn't related to stances, there were various studies in martial arts, so he told Mok Jayangan to ask if there was anything he didn't know. But over the 7 days, there was hardly anything he asked. No, there was one thing. I heard that thing on Master's face is a human skin mask, so how do you make that? Mok Jayangan showed interest in that rather than martial arts training. However, since he still didn't trust Mok Jayangan, he hadn't taught him about the final 3 stances of the Flying Phantom Saber art and the human skin mask yet. The first concern was his martial talent that could truly be called genius without exaggeration. And the second concern was an extension of this. Is this true? Yes. It's information received from the branch in the northern part of Anhui province. It's hard to believe. Just 3 days ago, he had requested information about the Yun Mok sword matter. The Shadow Clan master had ordered an investigation into the environment Mok Jayangan had grown up in to clearly understand what kind of person he was. With this level of talent, he thought the Yun Mok sword matter would have also put in a lot of effort to nurture him. However, contrary to such expectations, the Mok Jayangan described in the report was too different from the one he knew now. His martial arts talent was insignificant, and his standing within the Yun Mok sword matter was the worst. Rather, the one known to possess innate martial talent was a fellow named Mok Yuchion, who had also been dragged as a hostage from the righteous faction. It's hard to understand. His reputation within the family was too poor. To this extent, he was practically ignored in the succession structure. But how was this possible? Before being taken as a hostage, he was merely at the 3rd-rate level? According to the report, he should have been called trash, let alone having talent, but compared to his current appearance, it was utterly unimaginable. It was like looking at the records of a different person. This made him even question if the Yun Mok sword matter had distorted the information to hide their talent. The only thing that matches. Looking at his standing within the Yun Mok sword matter, it made sense for him to have grievances. After all, he was in a position where he wasn't recognized by everyone in the family. However, this alone was insufficient. Look into it further. Understood. In the end, more definite information was needed. If he had been the same as the image the Shadow Clan Master knew, this information alone would have been enough, but the person was completely different from the information brought. Even up to this point, the third concern was an immediate problem he was facing. Tap tap tap. The Shadow Clan Master tapped the floor with his finger out of habit and muttered, "What to do?" The desk in the office was filled with reports, all of which were observations of Mok Jae-un's every move written by the monitors. Since they had observed him for 7 days, he thought there would be at least one thing that would come up. But there was nothing. As if it was predetermined, Mok Jae-un's daily routine was simply martial arts training, meals, breathing exercises, and reading books before bed. That was it. For 7 days, there was no deviation from this cycle of actions. It's too consistent. Because of this, his suspicion reached its peak. When the records sent by the monitors remained unchanged for 2 days, he replaced them all, just in case. But they also had the same records as the previous monitors. So, 2 days later, he changed them again to different monitors, but it was the same. To this extent, he could really believe it to be true, but the Shadow Clan Master rather felt a sense of dissonance from these records. Is it for show? The feeling of trying not to stand out was too strong. As a result, all his actions felt like they were for show. Since he knew he was being monitored, it seemed like he was restraining himself to reassure them or gain their trust. What to do? In case he could coax or threaten the monitors like in the case of escort Sekyung, he had changed them 3 times. A total of 18 monitors had observed Mok Jae-un. For now, it was virtually impossible for Mok Jae-un, who had only been in the training room and separate residence for just 7 days, to persuade or threaten all of them and use them as he wished. It might have only heightened his vigilance. Mok Jae-un wasn't simply outstanding in talent. He was a very cunning fellow, so he must have already noticed that he was being monitored. So, there was no point in continuing to change the monitors like this. No other choice. A monitored target doesn't show what you want to see. In that case, it was better to change the method. Bayok. At the Shadow Clan Master's call, a voice came from the ceiling. Yes. The one called Bayok was the Shadow Clan Master's guard and confidant. His martial prowess had reached the pinnacle of the peak realm, and he was a former member of one of the 4 great assassination sects, the Silent Sorrow Assassination Sect, reaching the highest level in concealment. Bayok, replace the attendants with ordinary ones and withdraw the escort warriors, leaving only 2. Yes, I understand. The Shadow Clan Master's next move was this. It was to reduce the number of monitors and lower Mok Jae-un's vigilance. And Bayok will have to work hard for a while. Understood. Instead of openly monitoring, he was planning to secretly monitor through Bayok. Although his martial prowess was similar to Mok Jae-un's, Bayok, a top-class assassin from the Silent Sorrow Assassination Sect, was a master at concealing his presence to the point where even masters who had reached the transcendent realm would have difficulty finding him if he seriously hid himself. Of course, there were varying degrees of the transcendent realm, and it was difficult to deceive those who had surpassed the consummate level. However, he could easily deceive Mok Jae-un's level of perception. Mok Jae-un's separate residence. Bayok, who had been moving while suppressing his presence with the silent step, carefully entered the gap between the roof tiles. After entering like that, he headed towards the room where light was leaking out. From there, the sound of someone reciting something long could be heard. Bayok quietly moved there and looked down at the room with the candle lit from the ceiling. Bayok frowned. He saw Mok Jae-un grasping a man's head and chanting something strange. Turbid fire road, noon hour labor, promise to fairy realm, 1 grain transforms into 10,000. What? Just what was going on? Bayok, who had been looking at this seriously, quietly took out something from his bosom and, after watching for an opportunity, jumped down from the ceiling. Bayok, who had jumped down behind the defenseless Mok Jae-un, then swish! He held out an old scroll to Mok Jae-un. Then, Mok Jayangan, who had finished the incantation, turned his head and spoke as if it were nothing. You came quickly. Yes. Master. What on earth was happening? Surprisingly, Bayok called Mok Jayangan master. Then, Mok Jayangan received the scroll Bayok had held out and said with a smile, how is the new body? Demonic Monk. Chapter 132. Erosion. Part 2. Mok Jayangan received the scroll Bayok held out with a smile and asked, how is the new body? Demonic Monk. In response, Bayok answered with a satisfied expression. It seems useful. That's right. Surprisingly, Demonic Monk had already possessed the body of the man called Bayok. This had happened just 3 days ago. After the escort warriors and attendants were replaced for the third time, Bayok had secretly come to inspect Mok Jayangan's separate residence. However, this wasn't just once but his third visit. Mok Jayangan had already sent Demonic Monk to explore the entire Shadow Clan for 4 days, grasping how it operated and the extent of its power. It's fortunate. Mok Jayangan was aware that this person named Bayok was practically the right-hand man and confidant of the Shadow Clan master. Therefore, he had been waiting for an opportunity and subdued him when he infiltrated the separate residence. No matter how much his martial prowess had reached the pinnacle of the peak realm and he was skilled at concealing his presence as a former member of the Silent Sorrow Assassination sect, there was no way he could handle the eyes of a spirit and Mok Jayangan's martial prowess. Mok Jayangan judged that the captured Bayok had high utilization value. So, he had Demonic Monk possess his body. In this way, Demonic Monk, who had taken over Bayok's body, had been monitoring by the Shadow Clan master's side for 3 days under Mok Jayangan's orders. Is this what the Shadow Clan master looks at every day? Mok Jayangan asked, holding up the old scroll. In response, Demonic Monk, who had possessed Bayok's body, nodded and answered. Yes. He looked at it without fail for about half an hour at the hour of the dog, 7 to 9 p.m., every day. After receiving his report for the first time, Mok Jayangan became curious about this scroll and ordered him to bring it for a while. No matter what was written on it, he could memorize everything with just one look. At that moment, Demonic Monk glanced at the man whose head was grasped by Mok Jayangan's hand and asked. Master, but who is this person? Ah, you mean that mortal? It seems he was sent by that blind bastard last time. Phew. The one who answered this question was none other than Chang Ryong. She was freely smoking a pipe while staying out of the wooden puppet inside the separate residence. By blind, you mean him? Yes, that troublesome mortal. It was the blind man Wai Mengqion, a member of the Five Mountains Alliance and a confidant of Jiang Nung Ak, the second disciple of the society leader. Unlike Jiang Nung Ak, who withdrew, he showed a strange wariness, so she thought he would do something annoying in the near future, and that prediction had come true. He had boldly sent someone to Mok Jayangan's separate residence within the Shadow Clan's estate at night. Of course, they had captured him as soon as he entered the separate residence. He was quite tight-lipped. At those words, Demonic Monk looked at the unconscious man's hands. Both hands were a mess. All his fingers were bent backward, and even needles were stuck in his fingernails. He had been properly tortured. I had hoped he would endure a bit longer, but he opened his mouth on the 6th fingernail. Mok Jayangan clicked his tongue as if regretful. He had planned to pierce him with needles and then pluck out his fingernails and toenails. No matter how strong one's endurance was, it was difficult to withstand continuous torture after having one's internal energy sealed. Mok Jayangan removed his hand from the man's head and said, "Do you know what this guy said when he first approached?" He said he was from the Righteous Alliance's Silent Strides. The Righteous Alliance's Silent Strides? Does he think that makes sense? If he had mentioned someone else within the Heaven and Earth Society, he could have avoided deeper suspicion, so why did he answer in that way? As Demonic Monk was puzzled, Chang Ryong exhaled a long puff of smoke and said, "Who? Can't you see if you look? He's using his brain." Using his brain? He probably targeted the fact that the mortal is a hostage from the righteous faction. Unlike his master, that blind bastard was suspicious and wary of the mortal. Tisk tsk. Use your head. Your head. At her admonishment, the demonic monk scratched his head. Demonic monk had a straightforward side but was far from using his brain. Chong Ryong said to Mok Jiangyun. But I don't know what nerve that blind bastard had to blatantly send someone like this here. He could have been caught if he had made a single mistake. At her words, Mok Jiangyun stroked his chin. Come to think of it, that was also true. This place was none other than the estate of the Shadow Clan. Since it was a place that managed secrets, information, and spies, its security was thorough even within the inner city. But how did he come to the separate residence without being discovered? Suddenly, Mok Jiangyun's eyes sharpened. Why are you doing that? They deliberately left the storehouse open. They deliberately left the storehouse open? What does that mean? As she was puzzled, Mok Jiangyun shook his head and said, if you leave the storehouse open, you can know what the thief who entered wants. You can even find their hideout if you follow the thief. Could it be? Yes. It seems they deliberately let him in. There was no way the security of a place that handled secrets could be easily breached. Unless they deliberately let him in. If that was the case, it meant that they had already noticed this person's infiltration but had a high possibility of letting him in to find out his purpose. They're not the Shadow Clan for nothing. To handle someone's infiltration in reverse like this. Rumble rumble. Numerous presences could be felt from outside. Soon, the paper on the windows and doors brightened up from the south in order, illuminated by torches. The suddenly rushing presences seemed to have surrounded the separate residence so that there was no way to escape. Chong Ryong looked at Mok Jiangyun with sparkling eyes. The prediction was spot on. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In a dark alley between the walls, about 30 jang away from the Shadow Clan's estate. On the opposite side of this wall, there was a middle-aged man with long hair, his eyes covered with a black cloth, leaning on a bamboo cane. He was none other than Wai Mengqion, the second mountain and a member of the Five Mountains Alliance. Why was he here, not far from the Shadow Clan? Soon, someone wearing a mask and of unknown identity jumped over the wall and approached him, whispering. It seems they have rushed to that fellow's separate residence as you said. It went according to plan. Yes. Hoo. Wai Mengqion laughed softly. Everything was going as he wanted. He could imagine Mok Jiangyun being perplexed right now. Since he was an excessively cunning fellow, he must have realized his true intentions by now. Just a few hours ago. What? Is it really all right to do that? Yes. But not right away. Endure as much as possible. It will be painful and difficult, but you have to. When you say as much as possible? Until that fellow's suspicion is dispelled. I understand. But wouldn't it be better to disguise it as young master's side or the supreme leader's concubine's side rather than the clan master, just in case? No. That cunning brat will quickly notice if we mention someone who hasn't even contacted him directly. Rather, if I say I sent him, he won't kill him right away. Will he really? Trust me. I understand. But if that brat knows that the society leader sent him, how will he react? If he has truly defected to our organization and has definitely become a person of the Shadow Clan, he will report it to his master, the Shadow Clan master. If not, he will agonize over how to deal with it. But that doesn't matter. The Shadow Clan will make the first move anyway. Yes. The Shadow Clan handled secrets, so its external and internal security was thorough. Of course, not the entire estate was like that, but if someone tried to infiltrate from the outside to the inside, they would immediately notice. Once inside, it was only a matter of time before getting caught. If the Shadow Clan's security guards take large-scale action. Yes. At that time, he will die as the Righteous Alliance's spy, Silent Strides, again. This was Wai Mengqion's true intention. To create the image that Mok Jiangyun was in contact with the Righteous Alliance's spy, Silent Strides. If that happened, the Shadow Clan master would have no choice but to suspect Mok Jiangun, a hostage from the righteous faction. I entrust this to you, Jihang. I will certainly complete the mission. I will never forget this loyalty. Yes. Please take good care of my family in Danyang. I understand. From the beginning, it was a ploy devised with the resolution to lose one's life. Informing Mok Jiangun of the truth midway was simply to buy time until the Shadow Clan's warriors made a move. If he lost his life before that, he wouldn't be able to carry out the plan. I apologize to my lord, but that brat Mok Jiangun is not someone who can be trusted. If you take him in, he will become poison, not gain. So, it was better for him to become a spy of the righteous faction and be expelled. It would be even better if he unfortunately died. Even if he had truly defected to the Heaven and Earth Society, Wai Mingqiong could never trust Mok Jiangun. Then let's go back. After confirming that the Shadow Clan's warriors had rushed to Mok Jiangun's separate residence, the 2nd Mountain Wisconsin Mingqiong left this place with the masked person. Wai Mingqiong lay on the bed with a somewhat relieved heart. He trusted his intuition. Nothing was as accurate as the sound of the heart. Someone whose heartbeat remained steady and emotions unchanged in any situation was far from an ordinary human being. Such an existence must have something twisted about them. He had conveyed this opinion to his lord, the 2nd disciple Jiang Nung AK, several times, but it was all ignored as his desire for Mok Jiangun had already grown. So, what could he do? He had no choice but to resolve it on his own. Fortunately, what he had gained from becoming blind was not only the maximization of other senses, including hearing, but also the deepening of his ability to observe and his insight. It was a move he had devised through dozens of simulations over 7 days. No matter how cunning, he would not be able to escape and would eventually be dealt with by his master, the Shadow Clan master. It's quite refreshing now that I'm at ease. With that, Wai Mingqiong fell asleep in a good mood. How much time had passed since he fell asleep? Soon, Wai Mingqiong quietly lifted his head from the bed. Since he was originally blind, all his senses that did not rely on sight were twice that of ordinary people, and his hearing was even sharper. Although he was asleep, these developed senses always made him detect danger. What is it? At some point, it was quiet outside. It was too quiet to the point of feeling discomfort. For warriors were taking turns standing guard around his residence. He couldn't feel their presence. Swish! Wai Mingqiong, who had silently gotten up from his spot while suppressing his presence, grasped the handle of the bamboo cane containing the bamboo sword. And he carefully opened the door and went out. Wai Mingqiong slowly walked towards where the warriors were standing guard, suppressing his presence. Huff! Huff! He could hear breathing. The steady breathing he heard was not that of someone awake. Are they sleeping? Wai Mingqiong frowned. These warriors took turns standing guard, so they never worked half-heartedly. But no matter how much he listened, they were all asleep. At this, Wai Mingqiong felt inexplicably disturbed. Did it make sense for all the escort warriors around the residence to be asleep? As he was puzzled, footsteps could be heard from somewhere. Although they were approaching while suppressing their presence as much as possible, it was clearly audible to his hearing. Thump, thump. Wai Mingqiong grasped the handle of the cane and assumed a kicking stance. These footsteps. He had heard them somewhere before. It was only once, but he had accurately remembered them. It can't be? That fellow should be in a situation where he was imprisoned in the Shadow Clan's Golden Jade and being interrogated right now. But how? Whoosh! At that moment, the presence reached in front of him at a tremendous speed. Clang! Wai Mingqiong, who had instantly kicked, blocked the sharp aura flying towards him. The sound of metal clashing against metal strongly resonated in his ears. Tremble! The two people who had been locking swords clashed a few times like lightning and distanced themselves. Clang clang clang. Bam bam bam. As they gained some distance, Wai Mingqiong opened his mouth. How did you come here? You seem quite surprised. The owner of that voice was none other than Mok Jiangun. Why Mengqion couldn't understand at all. He knew that the Shadow Clan's guards had stepped forward and surrounded Mok Jiangun's separate residence. But how did he come here? The puzzled Wai Mengqion soon drew up his internal energy. First, I need to subdue that bastard. He didn't know how he had come out of the Shadow Clan and arrived at his residence, but subduing him was the priority for now. But then... Before that, you should take this. What? Whoosh. Something heavy that cut through the air. Since it felt too heavy to be a hidden weapon, Wai Mengqion lightly stepped back about 2 steps and dodged what Mok Jiangun had thrown. It rolled on the ground and stopped in front of Wai Mengqion's feet. What are you doing? I returned what you gave me, so is there a problem? What do you mean by what I gave? Suddenly, Wai Mengqion stopped speaking midway. After losing his sight, his senses had become twice as good as ordinary people. Naturally, this sense included the sense of smell. With the scent of blood rising from under his feet, Wai Mengqion stretched his foot forward with a suspecting heart and flicked up what Mok Jiangun had thrown. And he caught it with his left hand. Tap. At that moment, Wai Mengqion's expression stiffened. Coincidentally, the sensation felt on his palm was a face. The owner of that face was none other than Jihang? It was Jihang, whom he had sent to frame Mok Jiangun as a spy of the righteous faction. To be precise, it was Jihang's severed head. Chapter 133. Erosion. Part 3. The blind man Wai Mengqion's face stiffened. What was placed on his hand was none other than Jihang? It was Jihang, whom he had sent to frame Mok Jiangun as a spy of the righteous faction. To be precise, it was Jihang's severed head. For a moment, Wai Mengqion's mind became complicated. Just what was going on? Why does this brat have Jihang's head? He couldn't understand. Of course, Jihang's death was planned as the final part of this move. That was the only way to endanger Mok Jiangun without revealing the tale. But he should be in a situation where he was being interrogated right now, so why had he already died, and why was Mok Jiangun handing his neck to him? To the perplexed Wai Mengqion, Mok Jiangun said with a smirk. You must be greatly disappointed that the result is different from what you intended. You bastard. You seem to have used your head a lot, but it's a pity. It would have worked smoothly with others. What? Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Just an hour ago. In the office of the Shadow Clan's Internal Affairs Director. A Shadow Clan warrior urgently entered and reported to Internal Affairs Director Cho Yom-hun, who was standing with his hands behind his back. An intruder has infiltrated young Master Mok Jiangun's separate residence. Young Master Mok's separate residence? Cho Yom-hun's eyes narrowed. He had already received a report the moment the intruder had entered. However, the Shadow Clan had a practice of not immediately capturing intruders when they entered. They would monitor the intruder's route to find out their target and even reverse track them. This time, too, the internal administration was watching the intruder's route for reverse tracking. However, what is the intruder's intention? This was their concern. The Shadow Clan was already monitoring Mok Jiangun's every movement and action because he was a hostage from the righteous faction. But the intruder had gone to Mok Jiangun's separate residence. To the worried Cho Yom-hun, the Shadow Clan warrior carefully opened his mouth. It seems their goal is to make contact with young Master Mok Jiangun rather than targeting him. I see. The worrisome situation had occurred. In fact, those in the inner city knew that the Shadow Clan handled secrets, so they wouldn't carelessly set foot in it, and they were also well aware of its extremely strict level of security. Therefore, it was somewhat absurd for someone from the Heaven and Earth Society to infiltrate this place. In that case, is it a spy after all? The probability couldn't be completely ignored. If the intruder was a spy from the righteous faction, the situation they had been worrying about had practically occurred. Although the clan master had not yet allowed Mok Jayanan access to any particular information other than martial arts due to not trusting him, it was unacceptable for anything to be leaked outside even a little. What should we do? Capture him. What about reverse tracking? If young Master Mok is related to the intruder, we can't just let it slide rather than reverse tracking. Understood. Tap tap tap. As the Shadow Clan warrior who received the order left, Cho Yomhun also picked up his unique weapon, the Jinping saber, and summoned the internal administration's escort unit. Once the entire escort unit had gathered, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun led them with a solemn expression. The path to the separate residence wasn't very far. On the way there, Cho Yomhun recalled 7 days ago. Even if he scored the highest at the Corpse Blood Valley gates, you shouldn't have accepted him. You should know what it means to have scored the highest. I know, but Clan Master. That fellow could become poison to the Shadow Clan. No matter how outstanding his talent is, he will face heavy opposition due to his background. Of course, that would be the case. However, if we can gain certainty about that child, our clan will have an immense talent we have never encountered before. Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun could not understand the Shadow Clan Master's decision at all. If he still hadn't dispelled his doubts, why couldn't he let go of his attachment to the righteous faction's hostage? Because of that, the Shadow Clan's position could be narrowed in the future. If the intruder was truly a spy from the righteous faction and Mok Jayanan had a close relationship with him or had made contact with him in some way to do something, this opportunity could not be missed. If there was the slightest suspicion, for the sake of the Shadow Clan, he had to be expelled. Whoosh! With that, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun arrived at Mok Jayanan's separate residence. The place, illuminated by torches, was surrounded by dozens of Shadow Clan security warriors. Upon arriving, Cho Yomhun asked a great clan leader-level warrior, "What's the situation? Since we sent them in, they should be coming out soon." "Is that so?" Soon, as the great clan leader-level warrior said, the warriors sent inside came out supporting an unfamiliar person, and Mok Jayanan followed behind them. However, seeing the intruder being supported out, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun's eyes sparkled. That's because the fellow's hands were a mess. Anyone could see the traces of torture. Normally, seeing this, one might think, does this mean the intruder has no relation to Mok Jayanan? But Cho Yomhun, the Internal Affairs Director of the Shadow Clan, wasn't like that. Numerous variables and situations were being considered in his mind. The closest one was, it could be to avoid suspicion. Most of those who entered as spies were highly trained individuals. They had countermeasures prepared for various situations. Assuming he was a spy who had entered from the Righteous Alliance, he would always prepare a tactic to allow at least one person to escape in case he was discovered by the enemy along with his comrades. Well, this was just an assumption. The fortunate thing was that the intruder was alive. Since we captured him alive, we can make him confess somehow. This place was the Shadow Clan. It was also a place specialized in such matters. At that moment, Mok Jayanan saw him and greeted him with a salute. The Internal Affairs Director has come as well. Young Master. Cho Yomhun also greeted him with a salute out of courtesy. However, his face was already filled with the desire to interrogate him right away. But without losing politeness, Cho Yomhun said, "Young Master. An intruder entered from the outside, so were you not very inconvenienced by the enemy's threat?" In response to his words, Mok Jayanan replied with a smile, "How could that be? It's fortunate to see that the young master is safe. Thank you for your concern. I thought you were unaware since there was no intervention even though an intruder had entered, but that wasn't the case." At Mok Jayanan's words, the skin under Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun's eyes slightly twitched. Although he phrased it indirectly, it was a jab at why they had only discovered the intruder now when he had boldly entered like this. At this, Cho Yomhun shook his head and said, "How could we have only discovered the intruder now? We just left him alone for a moment to find out what he was after." "Ah, I see. I almost had a misunderstanding. Ha ha ha. Is that so? By the way, young master. Yes. I also have something I'd like to ask. What is it? I thought the intruder might be after confidential documents, but unexpectedly, he headed straight for the young master's separate residence. Yes. As you can see, that's right. So, I'm curious as to why this intruder went directly to the young master's separate residence. Can't we find out by waking him up and interrogating him? I was also interrogating him, but he wouldn't open his mouth easily. Huh. Internal Affairs Director Cho Yong-hun inwardly agreed with Mok Jae-un's attitude, as if it were nothing. If a normal intruder had entered and was captured, if there was no relation, he should have called for them to interrogate, not do it himself. But Mok Jae-un says with his own mouth that he interrogated him. Does he not know that it can raise more suspicion? You interrogated him yourself? Yes. Oh my. Is there a problem? This is quite troublesome. It would have been better if you had told us immediately after capturing the intruder. I was going to tell you once the interrogation was over. But you didn't do that and conducted the interrogation independently. Is that wrong? At Mok Jae-un's question, Cho Yong-hun snorted and said, Yes, it's wrong. The fact that an intruder entered the separate residence and you didn't report it but conducted an independent interrogation means, regardless of the method, that you had solo contact with the enemy. Solo contact? Yes. If you look at his hands, you'll see traces of interrogation. Is there anything particularly suspicious? Unfortunately, traces of interrogation can rather serve as a means to dispel suspicion about contact. Of course, I'm not asserting that the young master had such intentions. I'm just saying it could be possible. You don't think that's the case? The implication was that he suspected him and was reprimanding him for doing something that would make him suspicious. At Internal Affairs Director Cho Yong-hun's words, which kindly told him that he had done something suspicious, Mok Jae-un chuckled. He's laughing? He had clearly told him with his own mouth. He was saying that he had done something that would make him suspicious. But what was this reaction? Although he felt quite unpleasant, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yong-hun did not reveal it. In any case, since he had justification, he was determined to take him and reveal everything through interrogation with the intruder. Cho Yong-hun politely saluted Mok Jae-un and said, First, I apologize to the young master in advance. To prepare for any situation, you'll have to come with me to the internal administration for a moment. To the internal administration? Yes. As I mentioned earlier, the reason is your contact with the intruder. Until the intruder's interrogation is over and the young master is out of suspicion, it can't be helped. Internal Affairs Director Cho Yong-hun was now blatantly telling him that he was under suspicion. However, even at his words, Mok Jae-un still maintained a relaxed expression. Cho Yong-hun clicked his tongue. Let's see how long that composure lasts. What are you doing? Escort the young master to the internal administration right before he could even finish his words. Right then, the intruder who had been supported suddenly opened his eyes. Then he tried to shake off the arms of the warriors holding him. Bam! Hold him tight. This bastard, where are you? But the intruder's strength was not ordinary. In an instant, he threw the warrior holding his right arm to the ground. Thud. Ugh. Then he tried to grab the neck of the warrior holding his left arm, but... Bam! At that moment, someone appeared and pressed the intruder's shoulder while striking his back acupoints like lightning. Pressed by a strong internal energy, the intruder was soon forced to kneel. Thud. Ugh. Clan Master. The one who suddenly appeared and subdued the intruder was none other than the Shadow Clan Master. He had just arrived after receiving the report. The Shadow Clan Master clicked his tongue and said, It's been a while since a night visitor has come to our clan. Clan Master, you're here. Internal Affairs Director Cho Yong-hun approached him, saluted, and greeted him. And then, to take over the intruder subdued by the Shadow Clan Master, he stretched out his hand and said, "I will handle it." But then, the intruder suddenly blurted out, I apologize, Internal Affairs Director. I confessed everything to that righteous faction hostage bastard." Instantly, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun's expression stiffened. What the hell is this guy saying now? Why is he suddenly saying he confessed something to him? While he was dumbfounded, suddenly, murmurs could be heard from around him. Some of the surrounding warriors were looking alternately at the subdued intruder and Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun, creating a stir. Huh? Are these guys suspecting him now? Do they really believe what this intruder suddenly said? It was utterly absurd. While he was doing that, the intruder now started pleading. "Internal Affairs Director, please spare the lives of my family members. I am fine with dying, so please, I beg you." At this, the flustered Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun pressed him. "You bastard! When did you ever see me to make such a false report? Do you really have a death wish?" Then, Cho Yomhun hurriedly bowed to the Shadow Clan Master with clasped hands and said, "Clan Master, this is a false accusation. How could I possibly know someone like this? Interrogate the bastard right. Internal Affairs Director, to abandon me like this bastard." The enraged Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun tried to kick the intruder's face. At that moment, someone appeared and blocked his way. It was none other than Escort Bayok? It was Bayok, the Shadow Clan Master's escort. As Bayok blocked him, Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun couldn't contain his frustration and shouted, "What is the meaning of this? Right now? Why are you trying to shut the intruder's mouth? If you truly didn't collude, calm down." "Collude? Huh? Did you just accuse me of collusion?" Internal Affairs Director Cho Yomhun couldn't contain his anger at the absurdity. That intruder was falsely accusing him, and forget about helping, the one called the Clan Master's escort was doing this? While that was happening, murmurs from here and there pierced his eardrums. Was it ordered by the Internal Affairs Director? It really seems like it. Did he try to hold the family members hostage and falsely accuse young Master Mok? Hearing the warriors' voices, even though he didn't want to, the Internal Affairs Director felt like he was going crazy. Anyone could see that the situation was too out of the blue, but they believed it? This was a clear false accusation. He was so angry that his hands were trembling, but then the intruder shouted again, inciting those around him. "Clan Master, I only did as the Internal Affairs Director ordered, this bastard." The Internal Affairs Director finally drew his saber. He felt like he had to kill that bastard who was falsely accusing him to feel at ease. But then, Bayok blocked his way again and said, "Clan Master, should I subdue the Internal Affairs Director?" "Escort Bayok. Are you really?" Right at that moment. Swish. Along with the sound of something being cut, something fell to the ground with a thud. It was none other than the intruder's head. In an instant, the surroundings were filled with silence. Everyone had a surprised expression, but the one who had cut off the intruder's head was none other than the Shadow Clan Master. The Shadow Clan Master spoke with an expressionless face, unlike his usual self. "The intruder who tried to create internal strife within our clan is dead. From now on, I forbid anyone in our clan from mentioning this. Understood?" "Yes." As soon as his words ended, everyone shouted simultaneously. Overwhelmed by the pressure and momentum emanating from the clan master, they had no choice but to follow his order. The Shadow Clan Master's gaze, which had instantly straightened out the chaotic atmosphere, turned serious. Although he had forcibly suppressed the situation with his authority for now, he felt a strong sense of discomfort from what was happening. The intruder's sudden and seemingly intentional false accusation. Some warriors inciting those around them. Even Bayok, his escort who wouldn't move without his order, suddenly stepped forward to protect the intruder and pressure the Internal Affairs Director. All of this was permeated with a sense of discomfort. Swish. The Shadow Clan master slowly turned his head with narrowed eyes. In his line of sight, with the flickering shadows of the torches, Mok Jayangan could be seen with the corners of his mouth reaching his ears. The moment their eyes met, the Shadow Clan master unconsciously swallowed his dry saliva. The source of this inexplicable sense of discomfort. It was originating from Mok Jayangan. Chapter 134. Erosion. Part 4. Back to the present. To the second mountain of the Five Mountains Alliance, the blind man Wai Meng Chion, who was perplexed by the dead Ji Hang, Mok Jayangan said with a smirk. You must be greatly disappointed that the result is different from what you intended. You bastard. You seem to have used your head a lot, but it's a pity. It would have worked smoothly with others. Grind. The blind man Wai Meng Chion gnashed his teeth. Although he didn't know what had happened, one thing was certain, his scheme had not worked. It was a tactic he had calculated through dozens of simulations. He had prepared to deal with most variables, so how did he escape it? However, the important thing was that it wasn't a situation to question the cause of the failed scheme. Grip. Strength entered Wai Meng Chion's hand holding the sword hilt. Now that the original plan had gone awry, the only answer was to kill the fellow himself. Otherwise, the matter would go beyond his control. Wai Meng Chion quietly opened his mouth. I don't know how you escaped suspicion, but coming here was a huge mistake. A huge mistake? Swish. As soon as Mok Jayangan's questioning ended, Wai Meng Chion's sword cut through the air. In that fleeting moment, Mok Jayangan had gained about half a step of distance. Thanks to that, the sword narrowly missed slicing Mok Jayangan's neck and brushed past. You're fast. At Mok Jayangan's words, Wai Meng Chion said nothing. Unlike last time when he had tried to test his martial prowess, this time he had slashed with the intent to kill, but he didn't expect him to dodge it. He definitely surpassed the peak realm. He probably estimated him to be at the early stage of Transcendent Realm. Considering the few exchanges they had and the strength infused in the sword, it seemed certain. This alone was surprising. Just 17. For a guy not even in his prime to reach this level, his talent had to be acknowledged. However, you will die here. Whoosh. Wai Meng Chion's sword rushed towards Mok Jayangan, drawing a complex trajectory. Mok Jayangan's eyes shook at a rapid speed as the sword became even faster. This was the first time he had properly faced a master since gaining enlightenment at the Corpse Blood Valley report. Indeed, Wai Meng Chion's swordsmanship was beyond imagination. Swish 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 swish. It was not at a level he could dodge. Thus, Mok Jayangan also utilized defensive sword techniques to counter Wai Meng Chion's fierce attack. Clang 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 clang. The swords of the two clashed more than a dozen times in an instant, and blue sparks flew in the darkness. Each time the swords collided, Mok Jayangan's body was pushed back little by little. This clearly meant he was inferior in internal energy. Even though he reached the Transcendent Realm with innate martial talent, he can't avoid two weaknesses after all. The first was internal energy. When talking about the level of internal energy, the reason for mentioning the number of years was that the accumulated amount increased as time passed. No matter how much Mok Jayangan had reached a high level with outstanding talent, he couldn't match someone who had accumulated internal energy for decades like himself. And the second? Clang clang clang. Just as they were clashing almost evenly, Wai Meng Chion's sword suddenly deviated from its trajectory and twisted in a completely unexpected direction, piercing Mok Jayangan's thigh. As a result, Mok Jayangan also had to change his sword trajectory to block it. Clang. At that moment. Thud. Wai Meng Chion's heavy kick struck Mok Jayangan's abdomen. Along with that, Mok Jayangan's body was pushed back about 4 steps again. Detecting this with his hearing, Wai Meng Chion's mouth corners twitched. Experience. He lacks experience. While Mok Jayangan's stances were flawless to the point of being impeccable, he was unable to respond to the variations, perhaps due to a lack of actual combat experience or battles with masters. His stances were very straightforward. Although he was responding with appropriate stances, that alone was insufficient. In the world of life and death battles, experience could not be ignored. Whoosh! Wei Mingqian caught up to Mok Jiangyun, who had been pushed back, and pressured him while drawing up even more internal energy. Since he had found the opponent's weakness, he was determined to decisively push forward and settle the outcome. Fourth stance of the flashing star sword, overwhelming flash. Swish 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 swish. Wei Mingqian's sword created numerous sword shadows and pressured Mok Jiangyun with a dazzling trajectory. It was an incredible swordsmanship that was hard to believe came from a blind man. Even Mok Jiangyun inwardly exclaimed in admiration. Mok Jiangyun had gained a keen eye for swordsmanship after viewing numerous secret manuals at the Corpse Blood Valley report. Wei Mingqian's swordsmanship was so perfected that it was difficult to find any flaws. So he felt the urge to properly clash with him. Clang 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 clang. Mok Jiangyun's evil commandment sword and Wei Mingqian's bamboo sword collided, and the surroundings reverberated with the sound of metal. Their swords were moving so fast that they were invisible to the eyes of ordinary people. Swish! A sword grazed Mok Jiangyun's cheek, leaving a wound. Wei Mingqian's swordsmanship once again created an unexpected variation. Interesting. It was more exciting than sparring with the Corpse Blood Valley disciples. Their attacks were more straightforward and simple, but Wei Mingqian's sword brought changes from unexpected places, pressuring him. Swish! Once again, the sword brushed past Mok Jiangyun's ribs. They were all narrowly grazing the vital points. If he wasn't careful, the outcome of the duel could be decided in a single moment as Wei Mingqian's sword was increasingly tightening its grip on his throat. Luck is not on my side. Wei Mingqian's face, who was pressuring Mok Jiangyun, became more and more spirited. The winner of this duel was predetermined. If this were 5 or 10 years later, it might be different, but the current Mok Jiangyun was absolutely no match for him. He had a much greater advantage in both experience and internal energy. You are foolish, Mok Jiangyun. You shouldn't have come to find me alone. He acknowledged his martial prowess that didn't match his age, but he had chosen the wrong target for revenge. If he had a cunning mind to escape from his scheme, he should have used the dead Ji Heng as a pretext to pressure him through his master, the Shadow Clan master. Blame that foolishness. Swish! Clang! Wei Mingqian's sword deflected Mok Jiangyun's sword upward. At the same time, a decisive opening finally appeared in Mok Jiangyun's defense. The corners of Wei Mingqian's mouth rose bitterly. Overconfidence in oneself. That is the cause of your defeat. Convinced that he had firmly grasped the upper hand, Wei Mingqian thrust his sword towards Mok Jiangyun's neck, the decisive opening. With Mok Jiangyun's current stance, it was impossible to dodge or block. It's over. Wei Mingqian's sword was about to pierce Mok Jiangyun's neck. However, swish! At the moment the tip of Wei Mingqian's sword touched Mok Jiangyun's neck, it slid and slightly brushed the surface before passing by. What is this? Just what was going on? It was a perfect finishing strike. But why didn't it penetrate Mok Jiangyun's neck and suddenly slide as if blocked by something? He couldn't understand what this phenomenon was at all. Bam! As the distance narrowed, Mok Jiangyun's knee tried to kick up Wei Mingqian's chin. In response, Wei Mingqian utilized footwork with his left hand to push Mok Jiangyun's knee and gain distance using the rebound. Bang! Tap 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 tap. As they distanced about 6 steps, Wei Mingqian frowned as if he couldn't understand. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't comprehend. What Mok Jiangyun had just shown was an extremely advanced principle that couldn't be performed at his level. Ha! An exclamation flowed from the mouth of Chong Ryan, who was sitting on the roof smoking a pipe and watching. The reason she was so surprised was simple. He comprehended the ritual of repulsion technique. The move Mok Jiangyun had just shown was none other than the ritual of repulsion technique, one of the 8 thought-shattering techniques. If the ritual of binding technique could pull anything, the ritual of repulsion technique could push away anything that touched the body. Even Chang Ryong, who had been with him all along, didn't know this. It was because Mok Jiangun hadn't mentioned it even after gaining enlightenment. Of course, there was a reason for this. It's difficult. The way the ritual of repulsion technique manifested was different from the ritual of binding technique. It could only push away something that precisely touched the body, and matching that fleeting moment when the sword was about to clash was quite difficult. And it was greatly influenced by the practitioner's capability and true energy, so the stronger the force, the harder it was to repel. That's why Mengqian's sword had slid rather than being deflected. Still a long way to go. He hadn't mentioned it to Chang Ryong because he considered it an incomplete technique. Of course, it was still useful as it was. It had allowed him to deflect a fatal strike. At that moment, Mengqian opened his mouth. You seem to have some tricks up your sleeve. But will the same technique work again? Whoosh! As soon as those words ended, Mengqian launched his body towards Mok Jiangun. As expected of a master who had reached the transcendent realm, he had realized how to deal with the previous principle in a short time. Whoa! Mengqian's sword was completely covered in a blue glow. It was sword energy. He had judged that even the sliding principle wouldn't be able to handle it if the sword energy was more focused. I'll settle this. The reason he hadn't unleashed his energy until now was to protect his sword with aura. Since Mok Jiangun's evil commandment sword was even sturdier and sharper than the bamboo sword, the sword had been somewhat strained with each clash, so he had chosen this approach. However, if he turned all that energy into offensive sword energy instead of a defensive form. Clang! Bam bam bam! With just a single clash, Mok Jiangun's body was pushed back nearly 3 steps. The power had increased tremendously. However, cracks appeared on the sword. It was affected by the switch between offense and defense, but it seemed like it could endure a few stances at least. He could sufficiently settle the match within that timeframe. Whoosh! Mengqian tried to unleash a dominating sword stance against Mok Jiangun once more. Right at that moment. It seems your reserves have run out. What? Seeing the repetition of stances. Clang 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 clang. The moment the swords clashed, Mengqian's expression distorted. He had unleashed a sword stance with sword energy, but Mok Jiangun didn't budge at all. Rather, they were evenly matched. But what was even more surprising? You bastard. Just what? The sword stance he had just unleashed was exactly the same as his own flashing star sword's 7th stance, breaking the void. Right now, Mok Jiangun was performing the exact same sword stance as him. Mengqian couldn't believe this situation. Thus, swish 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 swish. He unleashed another sword stance towards Mok Jiangun, but swish 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 swish. As if he were a mirror, Mok Jiangun performed the same sword stance. For a moment, Mengqian was dumbfounded. Just what was happening? His unique martial art, the flashing star sword, was a secretive sword art passed down to a single inheritor and was never revealed to the outside. Yet this fellow was imitating it. He shouldn't know the breathing technique of the stances and had only seen it for the first time while dueling. Impossible. But how could such a thing happen? Was it possible to learn the opponent's sword art in the midst of a life and death duel where they were trying to kill each other? Was this even possible? No matter how outstanding his talent was, wasn't there a limit? This was too unfair. Grind. After being surprised by this unprecedented situation, Mengqian became enraged to the point of welling up. He detested Mok Jiangun for so easily imitating his unique sword art, which he had painstakingly mastered even after losing his sight. How dare you try to steal my sword art? It was unforgivable. Yes, then can you imitate this too? Even if you somehow imitated the external appearance of the sword art, the essence of swordsmanship wasn't acquired that way. He had completely grasped the essence of the flashing star sword by practicing it for decades, allowing him to bring various changes to his swordsmanship. Can a fellow like you imitate even these variations? Swish swish swish. What? Wai Mingqian hurriedly tilted his head to the side and launched his body backward to dodge Mok Jiangun's sword. A cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he gained distance. The 3 sword stances just now. They were variations. Even if it were him, if he were to bring variations, he would have done it the way Mok Jiangun did. Huh. What kind of fellow is this? He was imitating the variations in swordsmanship at a level nearly identical to his own. His innate martial talent alone was insufficient to describe this. He was truly a monster. Gulp. Wai Mingqian swallowed his dry saliva, perhaps out of tension. If he didn't kill the fellow here, he would become a major hindrance to the path of the second disciple, Zhang Neng AK. He had to kill him even at the cost of his life. He had to deal with him right away before he grew further and reached a level they couldn't even touch. Fortunately, he still had the upper hand in internal energy, so if it was now, somehow. Flinch. At that moment, a chill ran down Wai Mingqian's spine. An ominous feeling enveloped his 5 senses, and it was a kind of brutality. Sensing it, Wai Mingqian hurriedly raised his sword while igniting sword energy without a moment to think. However, clang! The bamboo sword wrapped in sword energy broke. And swish! Something chilling and cold brushed past his neck in an instant. Wai Mingqian instinctively hurried to grasp his neck. This? What? The internal energy in that last strike had surged by nearly 3 times. He was dumbfounded by the sudden increase in internal energy. Could it be that he hadn't been using his full strength until now? As he was perplexed, Mok Jiangun whispered softly in his ear. Why did someone who can't even see boast so much? If you had just kept your mouth shut, you could have at least preserved your neck longer. You bastard. Then sleep well. With those words, Mok Jiangun brought his finger to Wai Mingqian's forehead. Feeling that, Wai Mingqian inwardly cried out as if screaming. Stop. Please. Please. However. Tap. Wai Mingqian's consciousness was severed in an instant. It was because Mok Jiangun had pushed Wai Mingqian's forehead, which he was barely holding, with his finger. At the same time, Wai Mingqian's severed head fell limply to the ground, and blood gushed like a fountain from the cross-glandian of his neck. Splatter!